I wish we were in John and it was March.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rather than coming Christmas time and we're in John here at the crucifixion series and scene. The thing that amazes me is the humility of our incredible Creator. You're talking about par excellence in humility. That our Creator would take on human flesh, limited himself into a piece of dust, and he would suffer horrifically. He would experience the worst kind of shame and humiliation. And he could have done anything to stop it. Wouldn't have took anything for him to stop it. Not a thing. Unfortunately, he sort of had to bring his crucifixion along because of how inept even the darkness is. Darkness is really inept. It can't cross its T's. They can't dot their I's. They can't think straight. Period. It's impossible. And so Jesus has to help them. So they crucify him. Pretty sad scenario, isn't it? Yeah. And the worst thing about those that are lost, they are so blinded to the reality of how inept they are. That's the sad thing. Man, once you get saved and your eyes are open, then you realize how inept you are. Believe me, I'm unbelievably inept in so many ways. You know what? It makes me rejoice in the marvelous Creator who isn't inept. He's perfect in every way, shape, and form. And so we've been looking at these series of illegal, ridiculous trials that the Creator went through. The religious trial, only John is the one who mentions that he's brought first and foremost that night before his crucifixion, before he's brought before Annas, the real high priest power. Caiaphas was the reigning high priest. Now, what is amazing, I want you to see these two here, okay? And I want you to think through this. John skips the trial of Jesus before Caiaphas. And he skips the trial of Jesus before the Sanhedrin with Caiaphas there. He mentions nothing of it. But he goes directly and he starts writing about Pilate. Now the other one he skips Herod completely. Never mentions the trial before Herod either. Just focuses in solely, and I may say we get some real insight into this prefect, Marcus Pontius Pilate. An interesting individual, to say the least, who's on trial by Jesus. But the question is, why does John skip and not mention the trial with Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin? Or Herod? Do you remember I shared with you how John was known to the high priest Caiaphas? And if he was known and his family was known by Caiaphas, he was certainly known by Annas, the real high priest, and the father-in-law of Caiaphas. And so John gains access into the courtyard there, the high priest, because of him being a friend of the family. Possibly a relative of the family. And keep in mind that John is writing to the Jews, and he's presenting Jesus as God. And he never comes right out and tells you about the wickedness of Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. Is it possible because he's writing this letter to try to reach them that he doesn't come right out and hammer them for their sin and their part in crucifying their own Messiah? Whatever the reason is, there's no question about it that the Holy Spirit led John not to write about the trial with the Sanhedrin and with Caiaphas, or with Herod. The reasoning? Not sure. But the focus is definitely on Pilate. And if you recall last week in our time together, remember Pilate ask him, who do you want me to release to you? Barabbas? The Son of the Father? Or Jesus? Yeshua? Yahweh saves. You want the Son of the Father who is a murderer, an insurrectionist, a robber? Or do you want Jesus? And the religious leaders had stirred up the people that were up and at it at that time to ask for Barabbas to be released and Jesus to be crucified. And so we pick up in the text in chapter 19 these words. So Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him. There's a lot being said right there. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns, and they put it on his head. And they put a purple robe on him, and they began to come up to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they give him slaps in the face. Pilate came out again, and he said to the Jews, "Behold, I'm bringing him out to you, so that you may know that I find no guilt in him." Jesus then came out wearing the crown of thorns and a purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify, crucify." And Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." And the Jews answered him, "Well, we have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard the statement, he was even more afraid. And he entered into the praetorium, into the courtyard again, and he said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You do not speak to me? Me you do not speak? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and I have authority to crucify you?" Then Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given you from above. And for this reason he who delivered me into to you has the greater sin. So as a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." And therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out. He sat down on the judgment seat at the place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." So they cried out, away with him, crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he then handed him over to them to be crucified. Pilate had Jesus scourged. But prior to this, Pilate had sent Jesus to Herod. He found out that Jesus was a Galilean. He knew that that was Herod's jurisdiction. Herod was in the city of Jerusalem at the time in the celebrating of the Passover. And so he says, "Hey, tell you what, let's send Jesus over to Herod and let Herod do an investigation. See if there's anything worthy of death in Jesus, in this guy." And so when he gets to Herod, Jesus again shuts his mouth and will not say a thing to Herod. That's to fulfill Isaiah 53:7. That he was led like a sheep before its shearers, and he was silent. He spoke not a word. He wouldn't answer. Herod finds no guilt in them, but they mock him, along with Herod's soldiers. And they take, Matthew says, a gorgeous, bright, purple garment, which is kingly, and they put it on Jesus. And they lead him back to Pilate. Don't picture this as a long flowing robe. It's actually going to be a shorter type robe. But it's going to be extremely expensive. It is Herod's. It shows royalty. And the amazing thing is the irony that's in this. Here's this poor peasant, beat up prior to this by the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious leaders, because those trials have already transpired. And they put a bag over his head and they punched him and did everything imaginable. And so he was all beat up and bleeding when he was before Herod. It was already a mess. And then he gets beat up some more by Herod's soldiers. And then he's brought back to Pilate. And he's going to really get beat up. What we don't see here is that Pilate, after he comes back from Herod, goes out to the Jews and the leadership there in the courtyard, or outside the courtyard, and he says, "Listen, guys, I find nothing wrong with him. He's completely innocent. There's nothing worthy of death in this man." And they say, "Crucify him, crucify him." And it's at that point where he takes And he says, I'll release one to you, Jesus or Barabbas. And of course, Barabbas was the one released. And they are not happy enough with that. So Pilate takes him, and he has Jesus scourged. Now, scourging by the Romans, I said last week, it was 39, it was 40 minus 1, 39. That's what the Jews did. That's not what the Romans did. The Romans would beat you, and sometimes they'd beat you to death with the scourging. The pictures that we see are the Roman whip with 3 leather thongs coming out of the handle with the pieces of bone and metal tied in it. Flagellum is what that instrument was called. The flage was to rip the skin right off the individual. Many of those who were scourged didn't make it to the cross. They died because of the scourging, having their skin and their flesh ripped off their back and their sides. And the worst thing with that leather, if you would hit the back, it would just wrap right around. And of course, they were forced to put their hands up in the air. And so it would rip right around, and it would rip the flesh off the chest also. Unbelievable barbaric way of torturing somebody before you kill them. Jesus was so badly beaten and scourged that he couldn't carry that crossbeam, that cross member. And he fell down. He was so weakened from the loss of blood. Remember, Simeon was forced to carry it for him. Now, the scourging that Jesus took was the scourging that you and I should receive. We should be beaten to death for our sin. And if you don't see your sin as that bad, as deserving to be beaten to death, tortured to death, then you don't understand the holiness of God, His perfection. But this is God who is perfect, who is sinless. He's the one who is taking our scourging upon Himself. What you and I deserve. So the soldiers then twisted together a crown of thorns. And they jam that onto Jesus' head, and they literally take a rod and pound it onto his head and smacking him in the top of the head, and they beat him with a rod on top of that. It says the entire Roman cohort there, of all those soldiers under Pilate, they all come out and they all came up and were mocking him. Hundreds of them were spitting on him. Luke records that. They were all spitting on him and mocking him and bowing down before him. All the Romans. The entire cohort. Hundreds. Can you imagine all the heckling? They, Romans, hated the Jews, and they were just having a lot of fun with this guy. Dressed in a purple robe from Herod. Interesting, ironically, a crown of thorns rather than a real crown was placed on his head. You know what the crown of thorns represented? Ironically, the curse. In the Garden of Eden, we read in Genesis chapter 3 that the curse brought the thorns and the thistles. And Jesus would become the curse for you and me. He would bear the full punishment for the sin of Adam and Eve, and for the sin of everybody in the world. And a crown of thorns is a reminder of that. But could you see the multitude of demons behind the Roman soldiers, behind the Sanhedrin, heckling Jesus as he's being tortured and as he's becoming sin for you and me? The sinless one. Bearing all the shame, all the ridicule, the spitting. Was all playing out. He would be naked as he would be forced to carry his crossbeam. He would be naked as he hung on the cross. They're mocking, irony, hail, King of the Jews, when he truly was and is the King of the Jews. And not just King of the Jews, he is King of all, including the Romans. Slapping him in the face. So Pilate brings him out again, and he comes out to the rulers. He was hoping that the scourging was going to be enough. They'd get a lot of blood and gore, you know. And he's hoping that they would say, this is good enough. And they'd say, let him go. But not so. So he comes out and he says, behold, I'm bringing him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt in him. Behold the man, is what he says to them. Here's the man. Take a look at him. You got to be kidding me. There's nothing left of this guy. He's a bloody, beaten mess. Here he is. Crown of thorns and the purple robe. His true royalty. And so when the chief priests, the religious leaders, and the officers saw him, did they have any pity? Yeah, they had pity, all right. They cried out like the demons of hell, crucify, crucify. Let's back up and think about this. What did he do to deserve crucifixion? What did he do to even deserve a scourging? Raised the dead? Healed the blind? Healed lepers? Healed people that were lame? Cast out demons? He did nothing but good. He even got rid of the corruption in the temple and flipped the money changers' tables over and drove the animals out so the people could worship God. But that was a threat. Don't touch their pocketbook. Don't touch their power. These wicked religious individuals walking around in their robes and their religious tassels and all that garbage that they wore. full of nothing but dead men's bones. Wicked, wicked, wicked individuals. Am I right or am I wrong? Instead of having pity on an innocent man, they cry out, crucify him, crucify him. It wasn't enough that he was brought to nothing. They wanted him eliminated, just like their father, Satan, who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Being led by Lucifer himself, the religious leaders. Things have not changed. Things have not changed at all. There are religious leaders and there are political leaders that are completely empowered by the evil one and led by the evil one. All you have to do is just look at their true track record. And you will see clearly that they oppose God and they oppose the Word of God. And they hate people. Don't be deceived. Pilate then says to them, and he tries again. He keeps trying over and over. He says, take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him. Now this is crazy. He's already made it crystal clear way before this. Herod finds no guilt in him. I find no guilt in him. There is nothing worthy of death. This man has done nothing wrong, and so I'm going to flog him and almost kill him. You talk about a weak coward of a man. But I hated the Jews. He hated the Jews so much that after this, he'll go up north into Galilee and he'll put the Jews to death by the thousands, and he will torture them in unbelief. Caligula, now Tiberius is the Caesar at this point right here, and he fears Tiberius because Tiberius, like almost all the Caesars, is completely out of his mind. And Tiberius has put a lot of people to death. And he's brutal. He's a madman, just like Nero. But later on, Caligula will be the Caesar. What's his name? Caligula. Thank you for correcting me. Caligula. And Caligula say, tell you what, I can kill you, or you can kill yourself. So Marcus Pontius Pilate will kill himself in the future. This guy, weak and easily manipulated, even though he carries Marcus's name as the mighty warrior of the Knights of Pontius. Even Pilate means the tip of the spear, a javelin. He was the mighty warrior of the javelin of the Knights of Pontius. And he's on trial, not Jesus. John makes it clear in what he writes that it is Pilate on trial. Now the Jews answer him and they say, well, we have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God. And so when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. And he enters enters into the courtyard, and again he says to Jesus, again, where are you from? Who are you? Now he's a Roman, Pilate is, of course. And so they believed in many gods and many stories of the gods coming down and taking on human form and walking among us. And so when he heard that Jesus said that he was the Son of God, he was even more afraid. And he was thinking, oh my goodness, you mean I just scourged one of the gods? He knew something was absolutely out of whack the first he met Jesus and talked to him. So you're a king. It is as you say, Pilate. Yes, I am a king. But not of this realm. Not of this one. Not yet. And as Pilate listened to him, he knew that he was delivered over out of envy of the Jewish leadership. He knew there was something unique about Jesus just talking to him in his presence. Can't escape it. It's impossible to escape it. Now, what had happened prior to this, we read in the Gospel of Matthew, that while Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him a message saying, have nothing to do with that righteous man. For last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and put Jesus to death. And so what we know before he has him scourged, this report comes from his wife. Making it crystal clear that he's a righteous man, that he has done nothing wrong. Not only is he innocent, but he's righteous, positive in doing the good things. And so when he hears that he's a God, the Son of God, then he's the more afraid, it says there in the text. He was even more afraid. And so he truly tries to find out where Jesus is from, but Jesus wouldn't state anything at this time. Why wouldn't he? At least two reasons that come to my mind.
Why would he try to defend himself when he came there to die in the first place?
One is he needed to go to the cross, absolutely. And he had to fulfill Isaiah 53. That he'd be silent as a lamb before his shearers. The other reason is that when Jesus revealed who he was, and he mentioned truth, and Pilate says, what is truth? Remember? Pilate had his opportunity, but Pilate walked away. Pilate was just going through his duties. He really didn't want to hear. And in a short time, he has Jesus scourged. Mocks him and ridicules him himself beyond belief. And so then when he really wants to know who Jesus is, guess what? He can't find out. He can't obtain the truth. He wouldn't embrace it anyway. And so part of this here is Jesus is being quiet so that tremendous eternal punishment does not come upon Pilate. It's actually a form of mercy that Jesus has here as he is quiet and as he states and does not tell him who he truly is. His life has already made it crystal clear. He's already been rejected by Pilate. But he doesn't state anything because it's truly an act of mercy. So Pilate said to him, in the Greek it would be me is first in the sentence, in that question. It says, me do not speak to? So the emphasis is on Pilate, and it's on his pride, and he says, me? You don't speak to me? Who do you think you are? Do you not know that I have authority to release you? Oh, what a big, tough man. You're a bird brain. You just convicted yourself. I have authority to release you, and I have authority to crucify you. Yeah, I could have released you, and I should have released you. You're completely innocent, but I'm a total coward. I'm totally inept, and I won't release you. Don't you think I have the authority? Oh, that's what it's always about with our leadership at the top that is corrupt and crooked beyond belief. You and I are just sheeple to them. We are the lambs to be led to the slaughter. And the wicked leadership, even in our nation, is going full tilt in that direction. Jesus answers him, remember who's on trial? It's Pilate. Pilate, you would have no authority over me unless it had been given you from above. And for this reason, he, Caiaphas in the Sanhedrin, who delivered me to you, has the greater sin. Pilate, you don't want me crucified. It's the others. But unfortunately, you are going to side with them, and you are going to work hand in hand with the powers of darkness, because you are the power of darkness yourself, and you're going to crucify the Lord of glory. And you will be held fully accountable for your actions and your part in the crucifixion of the Creator. He had a free will. Did he or did he not? He could have done what was right. Could he or could he not?
Yep.
Yeah, he could have. And Jesus says, you know what? You have no authority. Pilate, you see the insult that he gives back to Pilate here. Pilate really thinks about you don't have any authority unless it's been given to you from above. It doesn't even probably compute in Pilate's head. There's somebody that's over top of you, Pilate. The sovereign Creator, my Father, who is one with me. You couldn't even lift your finger without my Father, let alone crucify me. But the religious leaders, they have the greater sin. It's crazy. It's crazy what they say. So as a result, verse 12, Pilate made efforts to release him. There it is. But the Jews cried out, saying, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Now they got him. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar. And guess what, Pilate? If you don't crucify Jesus, that means you are siding with Jesus, and he's a rebellious individual against Caesar. We got him. It was their final ammo on tying Pilate's hands to crucify Jesus. Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out, and he sat down on the judgment seat at the place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now what this is there where Pilate would pronounce judgments. Gabbatha has the idea that it's a raised platform. It's what we would see in a court today. You always see the judge sitting up on his, he's up on the stage and he's in his throne there. Bam! With the gavel. Okay? This is the exact same thing. This is where we get it from. The Romans. The platform was lifted up. Normally it was stone, and then oftentimes it would have ceramic, what do I want to say? Mosaic tile. Yep, mosaic tile. The pavement. So he's seated there, and that's where he makes this judgment. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover. And it was about the 6th hour. Debate as to what time this really was, the 6th hour. Is it the correct time? Is it Roman time? Some think it's 6 in the morning. Some think it's 9. Some think it's noon. 9 o'clock would be the best way to understand this. And so he says to the Jews, "Behold your king," and he truly was, bloodied beyond recognition. And they cried out, away with him, crucify him." And then Pilate gets another dig in at the Jews. "Shall I crucify your king? Look at your king. Shall I crucify him? He's already 3/4 dead." And the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Oh my. So he then handed him over to them to be crucified. But we read in Matthew's account here, he asked him, "What evil has he done?" Pilate asked the crowd, but they kept shouting all the more, "Crucify him." And when Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather a riot was starting, he took water and he washed his hands right there on that pavement in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves." And all the people said, including the religious leaders, "His blood shall be on us and on our children. We will pay the price for putting him to death." Then he released Barabbas for them, but after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. He may have washed his hands, but it certainly didn't wash his heart. It certainly didn't wash away his sins when he washed his hands. No matter what little religious ceremony he just did, saying, "I'm innocent," guess what? Didn't make him innocent at all. He's guilty of murdering the Creator. Guilty of murder. The mockery, unbelievable. And Jesus willing to put himself through all of it for you and for me. being willing to be brutally beaten, being willing to go through extreme shame and humiliation, being willing to take all our eternal punishment upon himself, to be separated from the Father, and to bear that astronomical damnation beyond our wildest imagination. This is a picture of the infinite love that Jesus and the Heavenly Father have for you and me. Can you see it? Can you see how much He loves you? And then the question that comes to you and me in application is, what is your response to this unbelievable Creator who literally lays down His life in every way, shape, and form imaginable to buy you and me so that we're His forever? What is your response? Is He worthy? Is He worthy of you laying down your life, suffering for Him? Is He worthy? Of you suffering the same kind of thing for Him? Peter would think so. And the rest of the disciples would think so. And they would all lay down their lives and suffering horrifically for Jesus. Don't you ever for a moment buy into that prosperity gospel being preached across the United States. Come to Jesus and He's going to fill your pocketbook.
Sow your seed.
What's that?
Sow your seed. That's what
Yeah, sow your seed, all right.
Seed,
Yeah, speak the word. Whatever you speak and it'll come about. What a bunch of unbelievable hogwash. I don't know about you, but I know about me. And I have given my life to the Lord, and you know me. I will not back down on preaching the truth. I give you the full picture and nothing but the true picture. And it doesn't matter how much somebody ridicules me or how much they mock me. I will never, ever, ever stop sharing Jesus and the marvelous, marvelous truth of this free, eternal life and forgiveness. Never. They are going to have to torture me the same way they tortured Jesus. And by His grace, I believe with all my heart that then and only then He will enable me to stay faithful through whatever torture they bring. And that's fine. The most important thing is that I stay faithful to the last breath. Closing hymn.